I was standing in my driveway at 6 in the morning, December wind cutting through my coat like knives, when I saw Deborah Harrington marching across the street with her phone pressed to her ear and murder in her eyes. My name is Frank Kellerman, and I had just finished plowing my driveway after the biggest snowstorm Vermont had seen in 15 years. 23 inches of heavy, wet snow had buried my property overnight, and I had work in 3 hours. My commercial-grade snowplow, a beast of a machine I had purchased specifically for situations like this, sat idling in my driveway, its blade still covered in packed snow. The machine was big, I will admit that. It stood about 7 feet tall and stretched a good 12 feet long, but it was parked entirely on my property, well within my property lines. Deborah stopped at the edge of my driveway, her perfectly styled blonde hair somehow immaculate despite the weather, her designer winter coat probably worth more than my monthly mortgage payment. She was 52, twice divorced, and had made it her life's mission to run the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association with an iron fist since she had been elected president 3 years ago. "Frank Kellerman, you need to move that monstrosity immediately," she said, lowering her phone but keeping it clutched in her manicured hand like a weapon. I wiped snow off my gloves and walked closer to her, staying on my side of the property line. "Good morning to you too, Deborah. What seems to be the problem? That industrial equipment is blocking the view from my home. It is an eyesore and a violation of our community standards. I am calling the police right now to have it removed." I looked back at my snowplow, then at her house across the street and 2 lots down. "Deborah, my snowplow is parked in my driveway, on my property. How exactly is it blocking your view?" Her face flushed red, and I could not tell if it was from the cold or anger. "It is a commercial vehicle in a residential neighborhood. That is absolutely against HOA regulations. Section 7, subsection 3 clearly states that no commercial vehicles may be parked in view of the street. I am not running a business out of my home, Deborah. I own a snowplow so I can clear my own driveway. Just like Tom Henderson 3 streets over owns a riding mower that is probably bigger than my plow. That is completely different and you know it. I am calling the police. You have been warned." She started dialing, her fingers stabbing at the screen with excessive force. I sighed and pulled my own phone from my pocket. This was not the first time Deborah had threatened to call the cops on someone in the neighborhood. Last month, it was the Johnsons for painting their shutters navy blue instead of the approved forest green. Before that, she had tried to fine the Martinses for having a vegetable garden that she claimed attracted rabbits. The woman had too much time on her hands and an inflated sense of authority. "You do what you need to do, Deborah. I will be inside having breakfast." I walked back into my house, stomping snow off my boots on the porch. My property was a 3-bedroom ranch I had bought 5 years ago, right after my divorce from Sarah was finalized. It was not much, but it was mine, paid for with money from my grandfather's estate. That detail would become very important very soon. Through my kitchen window, I watched Deborah pace back and forth on the sidewalk, gesticulating wildly as she spoke on the phone. About 20 minutes later, a Burlington Police Department cruiser pulled up to the curb. A young officer, probably mid-30s, climbed out and was immediately accosted by Deborah, who pointed dramatically at my snowplow like it was a dragon terrorizing the village. I grabbed my coffee mug and the folder I kept in my desk drawer, then headed back outside. The officer was taking notes while Deborah ranted about property values and community standards and how I was single-handedly destroying the neighborhood's reputation. "Officer," I said, approaching with my hand raised in greeting. "Frank Kellerman. I own this property." The officer turned to me, looking somewhat relieved to have an excuse to step away from Deborah's tirade. His nameplate read Officer Martinez, and he had the weary expression of someone who had already dealt with 5 ridiculous calls that morning. "Mr. Kellerman, I am Officer Martinez. I received a call about a commercial vehicle parked illegally on residential property. That your snowplow?" "It is. Parked in my driveway on my property, which I just used to clear 23 inches of snow so I could get to work today." Deborah interjected, her voice shrill. "It is a commercial vehicle in a residential zone. That is illegal. The HOA regulations clearly prohibit." "Madam," Officer Martinez said, holding up a hand, "I need to speak with Mr. Kellerman first. Please give us a moment." Deborah's mouth snapped shut, but her eyes blazed with indignation. She crossed her arms and tapped her foot impatiently. Officer Martinez turned back to me. "Sir, is this vehicle registered as commercial?" "No, officer. It is registered as personal property. I own it outright, bought it 3 years ago when I got tired of paying snow removal services. I use it exclusively for my own property maintenance." "And you do not run a plowing business or offer services to neighbors?" "Correct. Just my driveway, my walkway. Sometimes I help my elderly neighbor Mrs. Chen, but I do not charge her or anyone else." Officer Martinez nodded, making notes. "The HOA representative claims this violates community regulations. Do you have documentation about your property and any relevant agreements?" I opened my folder and pulled out several documents. "I do, actually. This is my property deed." You will notice something interesting about the date and the circumstances of purchase. Officer Martinez took the deed and began reading. His eyebrows rose slowly as he scanned the document. He flipped to the second page, then the third, then went back to the first page and read it again more carefully. "This property was purchased in 2019, correct?" "Correct. Inherited money from my grandfather, bought it outright. No mortgage. And according to this deed, this property predates the HOA establishment by about 15 years. This neighborhood was developed in phases. My property was part of the original Phase 1, built in 1998. The HOA was not established until 2013, when Phase 3 was completed and someone decided we needed organized community governance." Officer Martinez looked at Deborah, who had gone suspiciously quiet. "Madam, did you know this property predates the HOA?" "That is irrelevant," Deborah snapped. "All properties in Maple Ridge fall under HOA jurisdiction. We have authority over—" "Madam, that is not how property law works." Officer Martinez handed my deed back to me. "Mr. Kellerman, did you ever sign an HOA agreement or covenant?" "Never. When I bought this property, I specifically asked my real estate attorney about the HOA. She reviewed all the documents and confirmed that because my property predated the HOA, and I never signed any agreement to join, I am not subject to their regulations. I have that legal opinion in writing if you would like to see it." I pulled out another document from my folder, a letter from attorney Rebecca Walsh at Walsh and Associates, dated December 2019, clearly stating that my property was not subject to Maple Ridge HOA governance unless I voluntarily chose to join, which I had not. Officer Martinez read this document as well, then nodded. "Mr. Kellerman, you are not in violation of any laws. Your vehicle is registered as personal property, it is parked on your own land, and you are not subject to HOA restrictions. You are free to keep your snowplow wherever you like on your property." "This is outrageous." Deborah's voice hit a pitch that probably upset dogs 3 blocks away. "You cannot just ignore the HOA. We have rules. We have standards." "Madam, he is not subject to your HOA. He never joined. You have no legal authority over his property." Officer Martinez's tone had shifted from professional to slightly annoyed. "I will take this to our lawyers. I will file a complaint with the township. This is not over. You are free to consult with your attorneys, madam, but I am telling you right now that Mr. Kellerman is not breaking any laws. If you continue to harass him about this, he would be within his rights to file a harassment complaint against you." That finally shut Deborah up, though her face had gone from red to an alarming shade of purple. Officer Martinez turned back to me. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience. You are not in violation of anything. If she continues to bother you about this, document everything and contact the department if you need to file a formal complaint." "Thank you, officer. I appreciate you taking the time to come out here. Just doing my job. Stay warm out here." Officer Martinez walked back to his cruiser and drove away, leaving Deborah standing on the sidewalk, trembling with rage. I expected her to storm off, but instead she took 3 deliberate steps toward me, stopping just short of my property line. "You think you are so clever," she hissed. "You think you can just flaunt our community standards because of some legal technicality. It is not a technicality, Deborah. It is property law. I do not belong to your HOA. I never have. I never will. Everyone in Maple Ridge is part of this community. Everyone contributes to maintaining our standards. Everyone except you, apparently. I maintain my property just fine. My lawn is mowed, my house is painted, my driveway is shoveled. What more do you want? I want compliance. I want respect for the work we do to keep this neighborhood beautiful. I want you to acknowledge that you are not above the rules. I am not above any rules. I am just not subject to your made-up HOA regulations. There is a difference." Deborah's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "This is not over, Frank. Not by a long shot. You will regret crossing me." She spun on her heel and marched back across the street, her boots crunching aggressively in the snow. I watched her go, a bad feeling settling in my stomach. Deborah Harrington was not the type to accept defeat gracefully. I had a feeling this was just the beginning. I went back inside and finished my coffee, then got ready for work. I was a civil engineer at Morrison and Associates in downtown Burlington, about a 30-minute drive from my house when the roads were clear. With the snow, it would probably take twice that long, but at least my driveway was completely clear thanks to my supposedly offensive snowplow. The drive to work was treacherous. The highway had been plowed but was still slick, and I saw 3 cars in ditches before I even reached the interstate. When I finally made it to the office, my colleague David was already at his desk, looking exhausted. "Rough morning?" I asked, shrugging out of my coat. 2-hour commute. My street did not get plowed until an hour ago. How did you manage to get in so early? Plowed my own driveway at 6. Nice. I need to invest in one of those. Apparently, they make you a neighborhood pariah. My HOA president called the cops on me this morning. David laughed. "Seriously, for what?" She said my snowplow blocked her view and violated community standards. "What did the cops say?" "Nothing. I am not actually in the HOA. My property predates it, and I never signed their agreement." Officer looked at my deed and left. I bet that went over well with the HOA. About as well as you would expect. She basically threatened me before she left. David's expression grew more serious. "Be careful with HOA people, man. They can be vindictive. My cousin had an HOA president who made his life hell for 2 years over a fence dispute. Filed false complaints with the township, tried to put liens on his property, all kinds of crazy stuff." "Great. That is exactly what I needed to hear." I am just saying, watch your back. People who get obsessed with HOA power are not usually the most stable. David's warning proved prophetic. Over the next week, I started noticing strange things happening around my property. My mailbox was knocked over twice, though it could have been snowplows taking the corners too fast. My trash cans were tipped over the night before pickup, garbage strewn across my lawn. Again, could have been animals or wind, but the timing felt deliberate. Then things escalated. I came home from work on Friday evening to find a citation taped to my front door. It was an official-looking document on Maple Ridge HOA letterhead, claiming I owed $1,500 in fines for multiple violations: unauthorized commercial vehicle, failure to maintain approved exterior paint colors, and non-compliant window treatments. The citations were completely fabricated. My house paint was the same color it had been when I bought it, and I had basic white blinds in my windows, nothing controversial. I took pictures of the citation and sent an email to the HOA board, copying all 5 members, explaining once again that I was not subject to their authority and requesting that they cease and desist with their harassment. I received no response. The following Tuesday, I received a letter from the Chittenden County Clerk's office informing me that the Maple Ridge HOA had filed a lien against my property for unpaid fines totaling $1,500. A lien on property they had no authority over, for fines I never legitimately owed. That was when I decided I needed a lawyer. I called Rebecca Walsh, the attorney who had handled my property purchase and provided the original opinion about my HOA status. Her secretary scheduled me for an appointment the next morning. I took a personal day from work and drove to her office in South Burlington, bringing every document related to my property and the HOA situation. Rebecca was in her early 60s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, with short gray hair and an impressive collection of legal credentials framed on her office wall. She listened to my story without interrupting, making occasional notes on a yellow legal pad, and they filed an actual lien. She asked when I finished. According to the county clerk, I have not seen the official paperwork yet, but I got a notification letter. Rebecca pulled up something on her computer, typed rapidly, and frowned. They filed it Monday morning. The lien claims you are delinquent on HOA dues and fines totaling $1,500. I have never paid HOA dues because I am not in the HOA, correct, which makes this lien fraudulent. Rebecca sat back in her chair, steepling her fingers. Frank, what they have done is illegal. You cannot file a lien against property without legitimate standing. They are not your creditor. You have never agreed to their authority. This is a fraudulent lien, and it is going to cause you significant problems if we do not deal with it immediately. What kind of problems? If you tried to sell your property, refinance, or take out any kind of loan against it, this lien would show up. Even though it is fraudulent, it would complicate the process and potentially kill deals. It could also negatively impact your credit score. And the longer it stays on record, the more damage it does to your legal standing. I felt anger building in my chest. So what do? We file a motion to remove the lien, and we send the HOA a cease and desist letter explaining that they have committed fraud and harassment. If they do not back down immediately, we can pursue legal action against them personally and against the HOA as an organization. How much is this going to cost me? Rebecca named a figure that made me wince, but I agreed. This had gone too far. Deborah and her HOA board had crossed from annoying to illegal, and I was not going to let them ruin my property rights or my credit. Rebecca drafted a strongly worded cease and desist letter that afternoon, outlining all the ways the HOA had violated my rights and explicitly threatening legal action if they did not remove the lien within 5 business days. She also filed an emergency motion with the county court to have the lien removed immediately on the grounds that it was fraudulent. This should light a fire under them, Rebecca said as she printed copies of everything. No competent attorney is going to advise them to keep pushing once they see this. And if they do not have a competent attorney, then they are going to learn a very expensive lesson about property law. The cease and desist was sent via certified mail and email to all 5 HOA board members. Deborah Harrington as president, Martin Fletcher as vice president, Susan Caldwell as treasurer, Patricia Montgomery as secretary, and James Winters as member-at-large. I also requested copies of all HOA meeting minutes, financial records, and communications related to my property. As was my right under Vermont's public records laws, since HOAs were required to maintain certain documents for public inspection. 3 days later, I received a phone call from Martin Fletcher. His voice was nervous, apologetic, completely different from Deborah's aggressive hostility. "Mr. Kellerman, this is Martin Fletcher from the Maple Ridge HOA Board. I received your attorney's letter, and I want you to know that not all of us were aware of the actions taken against you. You filed a lien against my property. You are the vice president. How could you not be aware?" Deborah told us it was a routine enforcement action against a delinquent member. She handled all the paperwork herself. Most of us just signed where she told us to sign. We did not realize you were not actually a member of the HOA. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. "Mr. Fletcher, you signed legal documents without reading them. You put a lien on someone's property without verifying you had the authority to do so. I know how it sounds. I am sorry. We trusted Deborah to handle these matters correctly. She has been president for 3 years, and she has always been very thorough. She has been thorough, all right, thoroughly harassing me, thoroughly violating my property rights, and thoroughly committing fraud. I understand you are angry. You have every right to be. I want to fix this. I am going to call an emergency board meeting tonight, and I am going to push for an immediate withdrawal of the lien and a formal apology. What about Deborah? That will be up to the board. But between you and me, I think it is time for new leadership." The emergency board meeting happened that Thursday evening. I was not invited, obviously, but Martin called me afterward to report the results. The vote to remove the lien had passed 4-1, with only Deborah voting against. They had also voted to send me a formal letter of apology and to reimburse any legal fees I had incurred. But Deborah had not gone quietly. According to Martin, she had exploded at the meeting, accusing the other board members of betrayal and cowardice, insisting that I was undermining the entire community, and that letting me get away with keeping my snowplow would open the floodgates to chaos. She said some really disturbing things, Martin told me over the phone, about how you need to be taught a lesson, how people like you ruin neighborhoods. Honestly, Frank, I am a little worried about what she might do next. Did you remove her from the board? We do not have the authority to do that without a general membership vote, which has to be scheduled with 30 days' notice. But we did vote to strip her of her signatory authority on all HOA accounts and legal documents. She is president in name only now. It was something, but it was not enough. Deborah had proven she was willing to break the law to get her way. A vote stripping her of some authority was not going to stop someone that unhinged. I was proven right the following Monday. I left for work at 7:30 in the morning, same as always. When I returned home at 6 that evening, my snowplow was gone. At first, I thought maybe I was misremembering where I had parked it. But no, it had been right there in my driveway that morning, and now there was just empty space and some tire tracks in the melting snow. I walked around my entire property, thinking maybe someone had moved it as a prank, but it was nowhere to be found. My $15,000 snowplow had been stolen. I immediately called the Burlington Police Department and filed a theft report. The same Officer Martinez from the first incident came out to take my statement, and his expression grew grimmer as I explained the situation, including the HOA harassment and the fraudulent lien. "Mr. Kellerman, I am going to be honest with you. This sounds like it could be related to your ongoing dispute with the HOA. Do you have any evidence that Miss Harrington or any of the board members might have taken your equipment?" "No direct evidence, but the timing is awfully suspicious. And one of the board members told me she has been making threats about teaching me a lesson." Officer Martinez took detailed notes, including Martin Fletcher's contact information. "I will follow up on this. In the meantime, check if you have any security cameras that might have caught something." I did not have security cameras, which suddenly seemed like a massive oversight. My neighbor to the right, Tom Patterson, had cameras covering his driveway, though, and they had a partial view of my property. I went over and knocked on his door. Tom was a retired electrician in his 70s, a friendly guy who mostly kept to himself. He invited me in and pulled up his security footage on his computer. We scrolled through the morning, and there it was. At 11:15, a large tow truck with Granite State towing on the side pulled up to my driveway. Two men got out, hooked up my snowplow, and drove away with it. The whole operation took less than 10 minutes. "That is not right," Tom said, frowning at the screen. "They did not knock on your door or anything, just hooked it up and left." "Can you send me that footage?" "Absolutely. You want me to send it to the police too? That would be great. Thank you, Tom." I called Officer Martinez back and told him about the video. He said he would contact Granite State Towing immediately to find out who had ordered the tow and where my snowplow was now. It took 2 days to unravel what had happened, and when the truth came out, it was worse than I had imagined. Deborah Harrington had called Granite State Towing and claimed to be my wife. She told them I was having the snowplow towed to a storage facility in Essex because we were getting divorced and I was trying to hide assets. She provided my address and told them I would not be home during the day, so they should come while I was at work. She even gave them a credit card to pay for the tow. The towing company, not suspecting anything, had carried out what they thought was a legitimate job. My snowplow was now sitting in a storage lot in Essex, and I had to pay the storage fees to get it back, because the credit card Deborah used had been declined after the initial tow charge went through. Officer Martinez delivered this news to me in person, and he looked disgusted. "Mr. Kellerman, what Miss Harrington did constitutes theft and fraud. We are going to pursue charges. I need you to make a formal statement, and we will need the video evidence from your neighbor. You are going to arrest her. We are going to charge her, yes. The county attorney will decide whether to prosecute, but based on the evidence, I think it is pretty clear-cut." I felt a strange mixture of vindication and anxiety. This is what Deborah had brought on herself, but I knew it was going to blow up the entire neighborhood. An HOA president arrested for theft. It was the kind of drama that would dominate local gossip for months. The arrest happened 2 days later. I was not there to see it, but apparently, Deborah had a complete meltdown when the police showed up at her house with a warrant. According to Tom, who heard it from another neighbor, she screamed at the officers that they were persecuting her, that I had orchestrated everything, that she was the victim of a conspiracy. She was handcuffed and taken to the station, where she was booked on charges of theft, fraud, and making false statements. The neighborhood erupted. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk about the HOA drama. I had neighbors I barely knew stopping me in the street to ask what had happened. Some were sympathetic. Others seemed to think I had overreacted by pressing charges. A few admitted they had their own horror stories about Deborah's vindictive behavior over the years. One neighbor, Linda Chen, the elderly woman I sometimes helped with snow removal, came by with a casserole and a story about how Deborah had tried to fine her $300 for having a wreath on her door that was not the approved size. Another neighbor, Jake Morrison, told me Deborah had threatened to report him to child services because his kids left their bikes on the lawn. It became clear that Deborah had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years, and I had just been the first person willing to stand up to her legally. The Maple Ridge HOA held an emergency general membership meeting 2 weeks later. I attended out of curiosity, even though I was not technically a member. The meeting was held in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance, and it was packed. Every seat was filled and people lined the walls. Martin Fletcher ran the meeting. He looked exhausted and stressed, and I almost felt bad for him. He explained the situation with Deborah, the fraudulent lien, the theft of my snowplow, and the subsequent arrest. He then opened the floor for discussion, and chaos erupted. People yelled over each other, some defending Deborah and claiming I was a troublemaker who refused to follow community rules, others calling for her immediate removal and an investigation into all her actions as president. One man stood up and accused the entire board of negligence for allowing Deborah to abuse her power. A woman near the front suggested the HOA should be dissolved entirely. Martin tried to maintain order, but it was like watching someone try to herd cats. Finally, he called for a vote on whether to remove Deborah from the board immediately. The vote passed overwhelmingly, 73-12. After the meeting, Martin approached me. "I am sorry for all of this. I know that does not mean much now, but I genuinely did not realize how out of control things had gotten. You signed documents without reading them," I said. "That is how you did not realize. You are right. I should have been more diligent. We all should have been." For what it is worth, the board is going to be implementing new oversight procedures. No single person will have the authority to take legal action without full board review. "That is good, but I am still not joining your HOA." Martin actually smiled. "I would not expect you to." The criminal case against Deborah moved forward. She hired an attorney, some aggressive guy from Montpelier who tried to argue that the whole thing was a misunderstanding, that Deborah had genuinely believed she had authority over my property and was trying to enforce legitimate HOA rules. The argument fell apart when the prosecutor presented evidence of the fake phone call to the towing company, where Deborah had explicitly pretended to be my wife and fabricated a story about divorce and hidden assets. In March, Deborah pled guilty to theft and fraud charges as part of a plea deal. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered to pay full restitution for my legal fees, the towing and storage costs, and damages. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Vermont. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Patricia Lawson, had some choice words for Deborah during the sentencing hearing. I was there in the courtroom, sitting in the gallery, and I watched Deborah's face as the judge spoke. "Miss Harrington, you abused a position of trust in your community to harass and intimidate a neighbor who had done nothing wrong. You filed fraudulent legal documents, you committed theft, and you lied to law enforcement, all because someone owned a snowplow you did not like. Your behavior was petty, vindictive, and illegal. You are lucky the state agreed to a plea deal because, frankly, you deserve worse." Deborah stood there, stone-faced, but I could see her hands shaking. After the sentencing, her attorney led her quickly out of the courtroom, avoiding eye contact with everyone. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was finally over. But the story does not quite end there. The Maple Ridge HOA never recovered its reputation. After Deborah's arrest and conviction became public knowledge, people started questioning everything about the organization. An audit of the HOA finances revealed that Deborah had been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses, including landscaping for her own property and meals at expensive restaurants. She claimed they were business expenses for HOA recruitment and planning, but there was no documentation, no receipts that justified the spending. The total misappropriation came to about $8,000 over 3 years. Not a fortune, but enough to constitute embezzlement. The HOA board voted to pursue civil action to recover the funds, and Deborah eventually settled, agreeing to repay everything plus interest. Within 6 months of Deborah's removal, 30% of the HOA members had voted to leave the organization. Vermont law allowed property owners to withdraw from HOAs under certain circumstances, and the scandal provided ample justification. The mass exodus left the HOA severely underfunded and unable to maintain common areas or enforce any regulations. By the end of the year, the Maple Ridge HOA had essentially collapsed. Martin Fletcher and the remaining board members voted to dissolve the organization entirely, returning all remaining funds to current members and releasing everyone from their covenants. The neighborhood would continue without formal governance, relying on township ordinances and basic neighborly cooperation instead. I will admit, there was a certain satisfaction in watching it all fall apart. Not because I wanted the neighborhood to descend into chaos, but because the HOA under Deborah's leadership had been a source of stress and conflict for too many people. Without it, people seemed happier, more relaxed. Neighbors started talking to each other instead of reporting each other. Community events became informal gatherings rather than mandatory functions with attendance requirements. My snowplow remained parked in my driveway, exactly where it belonged. I used it that winter and the next, clearing my property after every storm. Sometimes I helped Tom Patterson and Linda Chen with their driveways too, not because anyone required me to, but because it was the neighborly thing to do. Deborah moved away about a year after her sentencing. She sold her house at a loss and left Vermont entirely. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that she relocated to Arizona. I hoped, for everyone's sake, that she found a community without an HOA because she clearly could not handle the responsibility. Rebecca Walsh, my attorney, sent me a final bill that included her success fee for resolving the lien and supporting the criminal case. It was expensive, but worth every penny. She also sent a handwritten note that said, "Never underestimate the importance of reading your property deed. You saved yourself years of headaches by knowing your rights." She was right. If I had not known that my property predated the HOA, if I had not kept meticulous records and consulted an attorney early on, Deborah might have succeeded in making my life miserable. Knowledge of property law and documentation had been my best defense. I framed the letter from Attorney Walsh and hung it in my home office, right next to a photo of my grandfather, the man whose inheritance had allowed me to buy my property in the first place. He had been a stubborn, independent man who believed in owning things outright and not owing anyone anything. I think he would have appreciated how this all turned out. Life returned to normal, or as normal as life gets in a Vermont neighborhood after a major scandal. I still work at Morrison and Associates, still drive my 30-minute commute, still come home to my quiet house. But now when I pull into my driveway and see my snowplow parked there, big and industrial and completely legal, I feel a sense of vindication. That first morning when Deborah marched across the street with her phone, and her outrage feels like years ago, though it has only been about 18 months. The confrontation that started over a snowplow blocking a view that was not actually being blocked became a catalyst for exposing corruption, embezzlement, and abuse of power. Officer Martinez stopped by one afternoon, months after everything had settled. He was doing a routine patrol and saw me working in my yard. He pulled over and got out of his cruiser. "Mr. Kellerman, I wanted to check in and see how everything has been going." "Quiet," I said, "which is exactly how I like it. Good to hear." I will tell you, that case was one of the more interesting ones I have worked in my career. We do not usually get HOA disputes that escalate to felony charges. Hopefully, you will not get many more, from your mouth to God's ears. He glanced at my snowplow sitting in the driveway. "That is the famous machine that started it all, huh?" "That is the one. Best $15,000 I ever spent." Officer Martinez laughed. "I bet. Well, enjoy your peace and quiet. You earned it." He drove off, and I went back to raking leaves, my snowplow standing sentry in the driveway like a faithful guard dog. The neighborhood has settled into a new rhythm. Without the HOA, people are responsible for their own properties, and surprisingly, most people do just fine. There are no citations for grass being an inch too tall, no fines for unauthorized garden gnomes, no threats of liens for having the wrong shade of paint. Turns out, when you treat people like adults capable of maintaining their own homes, they generally do. Some former HOA members tried to start a voluntary neighborhood association, something with no legal authority but focused on organizing social events and maintaining the community center. It has been moderately successful. They had a decent 4th of July barbecue last summer, and they organize a holiday lights contest in December. I attend occasionally, but I am not on any committees. I have had enough of neighborhood politics to last a lifetime. Tom Patterson and I became better friends through all of this. We get together every few weeks for beers and conversation. He told me he had wanted to push back against Deborah's HOA overreach for years, but had not had the energy to fight it. Watching me stand up to her had inspired him, he said, and he regretted not speaking up sooner. Linda Chen still brings me casseroles, and I still plow her driveway whenever it snows. She is 92 now, sharp as ever, and she loves to gossip about the neighborhood drama. She refers to the whole Deborah situation as the Great HOA War and insists I am a hero for exposing corruption. I tell her I was just protecting my property, but she will not hear it. The truth is, I did not set out to be a hero or to dismantle an HOA. I just wanted to plow my driveway without being harassed. But sometimes standing up for yourself has ripple effects you do not anticipate. My refusal to be bullied exposed a pattern of abuse that had been hurting people for years. Deborah's downfall was ultimately her own doing, caused by her inability to accept that she did not have absolute authority over everyone and everything in the neighborhood. I learned a lot through this experience. I learned that HOAs can be useful for managing shared spaces and common interests, but they can also become vehicles for petty tyranny if the wrong people get power. I learned that property rights matter, that documentation matters, and that knowing the law can be your best protection against abuse. I learned that sometimes the right thing to do is stand your ground, even when it would be easier to just comply and hope the problem goes away. Most importantly, I learned that a snowplow is not just a tool for removing snow. It is a symbol of independence, self-reliance, and the fundamental right to use your own property as you see fit, as long as you are not hurting anyone else. Every winter, When the first big storm rolls through and I fire up that snowplow and clear my driveway before the sun comes up. I think about that morning when Deborah marched across the street with fire in her eyes. I think about Officer Martinez reading my deed and understanding immediately that I was in the right. I think about the long, frustrating process of fighting the fraudulent lien, the theft, the criminal case, and the eventual vindication. And then I think about how I am standing in my own driveway, on my own property, using my own equipment, free from the arbitrary rules and vindictive enforcement of an HOA I never agreed to join. That thought makes even the coldest Vermont morning feel a little bit warmer. The property deed that saved me that day is filed safely in my desk drawer, along with all the other documents from the case. I keep them not because I think I will need them again, but as a reminder. A reminder that rights mean nothing if you do not know you have them and are not willing to defend them. A reminder that bullies often back down when confronted with facts and legal authority. A reminder that justice, though sometimes slow and expensive, does eventually prevail. My grandfather used to say that the best investment you can make is in something you own outright, something nobody can take from you. He meant it financially, but it applies in other ways too. My property, my rights, my willingness to stand up for myself, these are things I own outright, things nobody can take from me without a fight. Deborah tried. She tried with threats, with fake citations, with a fraudulent lien, and ultimately with outright theft. But she failed, because I knew my rights and I was willing to defend them. The irony is that if she had just left me alone, none of this would have happened. My snowplow would still be parked in my driveway, but she would still be HOA president, still collecting dues, still wielding power over the neighborhood. Her obsession with controlling something she had no authority over led directly to her own downfall. There is a lesson in that, I think. About power, about control, about the danger of letting petty grievances escalate into life-altering conflicts. But I doubt Deborah learned it. Some people are constitutionally incapable of self-reflection, incapable of admitting they were wrong. They blame everyone else for their problems and never take responsibility for their own actions. I feel a little bit sorry for her, honestly. She threw away her reputation, her position, her standing in the community, all because she could not stand the sight of a snowplow that was not even on her property and was not actually blocking her view. It is a special kind of tragedy, the self-inflicted kind. But that is her burden to carry, not mine. As for me, I am exactly where I want to be. In my house that I own outright, on property I have every right to use as I see fit, in a neighborhood that has learned to function without petty tyranny disguised as community standards. And when the snow falls, as it always does in Vermont, I will be ready. My snowplow will be fueled, maintained, and parked exactly where it belongs in my driveway on my property, under my control. No HOA required.